Aksum was becoming more than just a trading empire. It was building an identity that would shape Ethiopia forever. According to legend, the Queen of Sheba traveled from Ethiopia to visit King Solomon in Jerusalem. Their story became part of Ethiopia's royal history. Later rulers claimed they were descendants of Solomon himself. Another legend said the Ark of the Covenant, the sacred chest from the Bible, was brought to Ethiopia and hidden there for protection. Then, in the 4th century, the empire changed forever. King Ezana converted to Christianity, making Aksum one of the first Christian kingdoms on earth. Churches rose across the mountains. Ancient manuscripts were written by hand. Crosses replaced old symbols. Faith became tied to the empire itself. Ethiopia was now both deeply African and closely connected to the ancient world beyond the Red Sea. But every empire attracts enemies. And soon, Ethiopia would find itself surrounded. For centuries, the kingdom of Aksum had grown rich from the sea. But slowly, the world around Ethiopia began to change. New powers rose across Arabia and the Middle East. Islamic armies spread rapidly across the Red Sea, taking control of major ports and trade routes that Aksum once depended on. Almost overnight, Ethiopia found itself cut off. The great trade networks that had made Aksum powerful began to collapse. Ships stopped arriving as often. Wealth disappeared from the cities. The empire slowly weakened, and its rulers pulled deeper into the mountains for protection. As the centuries passed, Ethiopia became more isolated from Christian Europe. Surrounded by growing Muslim kingdoms and sultanates, the empire struggled to survive in a hostile region. Border wars became common. Raids destroyed farms and villages. Entire communities disappeared into the highlands, hiding behind cliffs and mountain passes. Then came the greatest threat of all. In the 16th century, a powerful military leader named Ahmed ibn Ibrahim al-Ghazi launched a massive invasion into Ethiopia. His armies moved quickly across the land, burning churches, destroying monasteries, and crushing royal forces. Ancient manuscripts were lost in flames. Stone buildings that had stood for hundreds of years collapsed into ruins. For ordinary people, the war became a nightmare. Villages were abandoned overnight. Families fled through cold mountain paths carrying whatever food they could find. Starvation spread across the countryside. Priests hid sacred objects inside caves while refugees crowded into isolated fortresses high above the valleys. For a moment, it seemed Ethiopia itself might disappear forever. But in its darkest hour, help arrived from across the sea. Portuguese soldiers entered Ethiopia carrying firearms unlike anything many local armies had seen before. Muskets and cannons changed the war. Slowly, the invading forces were pushed back. Ethiopia survived. Its faith survived. Its kingdom survived. But the empire that emerged from the war was deeply wounded. Cities lay in ruins. Trade had collapsed. Entire regions were shattered by decades of violence and fear. And as the wars ended, a new danger emerged from inside the empire itself. After surviving invasion and near destruction, Ethiopia entered one of the darkest periods in its history. The empire was still standing, but its unity was gone. Powerful regional lords fought each other for control while the emperors in the capital slowly lost their authority. This period became known as the era of the princes. Across the highlands, rival warlords raised private armies and battled for power. One ruler might control a province for a few years, only to be betrayed or murdered by another. Emperors still wore crowns and sat on thrones, but many had become little more than puppets controlled by stronger nobles behind palace walls. The empire was breaking apart from the inside. Palaces filled with conspiracies and secret alliances. Nobles whispered in dark rooms while servants carried rumors through crowded halls. Assassinations became common. Trust disappeared. Every alliance felt temporary. Every friendship carried danger. Beyond the courts, ordinary people suffered the most. Roads that once connected cities became unsafe and abandoned. Farmers lost crops during constant fighting. Famine spread through parts of the countryside. Villages were destroyed not by foreign invaders, but by Ethiopian armies fighting other Ethiopians. Religious divisions deepened the chaos as different groups struggled for influence and power. The great empire that had once defeated enemies from abroad now seemed trapped in endless internal conflict. And the longer the chaos continued, the weaker Ethiopia became. Some regions acted almost like independent kingdoms. Local rulers ignored the emperor completely. Trade slowed. Law and order collapsed in many areas. Fear spread across the land as people no longer knew who truly ruled the empire. For decades, Ethiopia remained divided, unstable, and exhausted. But in the middle of the disorder, one man began rising above the others. A fierce and determined leader who believed the old system had failed completely. He wanted to reunite the empire, crush the warlords, and rebuild Ethiopia into a strong modern state. His name was Tewodros II. He believed only brutal reform could save Ethiopia. Tewodros II believed Ethiopia could no longer survive as a broken empire divided by warlords and fear. He wanted to rebuild the nation into a strong, united kingdom with one ruler, one army, and one vision for the future. And he was willing to use force to do it. Tewodros crushed rival nobles and tried to pull power back to the center of the empire. He built stronger armies, pushed for new weapons, and opened contact with Europe in hopes of modernizing Ethiopia. But his rule was harsh and often violent. Enemies surrounded him from every side, and after years of war, his empire collapsed with him. Still, the idea of a stronger Ethiopia survived. After him came Yohannes IV, a powerful emperor who defended the empire from foreign threats and expanded control across the highlands. Then came the ruler who would change Ethiopia forever, Menelik II. Under Menelik, Ethiopia entered a new age. Roads and railways began linking distant regions together. Modern weapons poured into the empire. Schools and new systems of government appeared. Trade expanded. And in the late 19th century, Menelik founded a new capital deep in the highlands, Addis Ababa. The city quickly became the heart of a growing empire. But as European powers rushed to colonize Africa, Italy turned its eyes toward Ethiopia. Many believed Ethiopia would fall like so many other African kingdoms before it. They were wrong. In 1896, massive Ethiopian armies gathered in the mountains near Adwa. Thousands of soldiers marched beneath waving flags carrying rifles, swords, and fierce determination. Men and women crossed rocky hills together as drums echoed through the valleys. Then the battle began. Against all expectations, Ethiopia crushed the Italian army. The victory at Adwa shocked the world. An African empire had defeated a European colonial power in open battle. Across Africa and beyond, Ethiopia became a symbol of resistance, pride, and independence. But victory came with a hidden cost. As the empire expanded and centralized its power, ethnic divisions and regional tensions grew stronger beneath the surface. And in the 20th century, those tensions would explode. At the center of the new empire stood Addis Ababa. What began as a small settlement quickly grew into a fast-moving modern capital. Roads expanded. Buildings rose from the ground. Markets grew louder and more crowded each year. Ethiopia was stepping into a new world. Under Emperor Haile Selassie, the country pushed harder into modernization. Schools were built, and education slowly reached more people. Ethiopia formed stronger ties with foreign nations and joined global diplomacy. The emperor even spoke at the League of Nations, trying to place Ethiopia on equal ground with powerful countries of the world. But this new growth was not equal. While nobles and officials lived in comfort, many ordinary people struggled in poverty. Wealth was concentrated in the capital while rural areas were often left behind. The gap between rich and poor grew wider, even as the empire tried to present itself as modern and united. Then, everything changed. In 1935, Fascist Italy under Mussolini invaded Ethiopia again. This time, the attack was far more brutal than before. Advanced weapons, airplanes, and chemical gas were used against Ethiopian forces. Villages were destroyed. Civilians suffered. The skies over Ethiopia filled with smoke and fear. Addis Ababa was occupied. Foreign soldiers marched through its streets. The empire that had once defeated Italy at Adwa was now under foreign control. Emperor Haile Selassie was forced into exile. But from abroad, he spoke to the world, warning nations that if Ethiopia could fall, no country was safe. His speech became a powerful call for justice and resistance. Meanwhile, in the mountains, Ethiopian fighters continued to resist. Small groups used the land itself as protection, refusing to give up their homeland. Years later, during World War II, global conflict weakened Italy's control. Allied forces helped push them out, and Ethiopia finally regained its independence. The emperor returned. The flag was raised again. The empire had survived another invasion. But beneath the celebration, deeper problems remained. The country was changed, divided, and unstable. And peace would not last long. After the return of independence, many hoped Ethiopia would finally enter a peaceful modern age. But instead, the country faced new waves of struggle. The economy slowed. Food became harder to find in some regions. People in cities and villages began to feel growing anger toward the old imperial system. Protests started to rise. Students, workers, and soldiers demanded change. They wanted land reform, fair government, and an end to inequality. The pressure grew stronger each year until, in 1974, Emperor Haile Selassie was overthrown. The empire that had lasted for centuries finally came to an end. In its place rose a new military government called the Derg. At first, many believed it would bring order and fairness. But instead, Ethiopia entered another dark period. The Red Terror began, a time of fear where thousands of people were arrested, tortured, or killed. Streets filled with tension. Silence replaced trust. No one felt safe. At the same time, war spread across the country. The long conflict in Eritrea intensified, draining lives and resources. The Cold War pulled Ethiopia into global politics, as foreign powers supported different sides of the conflict. The nation became a battlefield of ideas as much as weapons. Then came disaster. In the 1980s, famine struck Ethiopia with devastating force. Crops failed.
Village en tide.
Families walked for days in search of food. Images of starving children spread around the world, shocking global audiences. Refugee camps grew as millions struggled to survive. Even as suffering deepened, resistance movements began to rise. Rebel groups advanced from the mountains and countryside, slowly weakening the military government. After years of conflict, the Derg regime finally collapsed in 1991. Ethiopia had once again survived collapse, war, and famine. But the cost was enormous. The empire was gone. The nation was changed forever. And its identity was still being fought over in new ways. And today, Ethiopia remains one of Africa's most influential and complicated nations. Today, Ethiopia stands in a new era, but its past is never far behind. In Addis Ababa, modern skyscrapers rise next to old neighborhoods. Busy roads are filled with cars, buses, and people moving through a city that never seems to stop growing. Ethiopia is now one of the fastest growing countries in Africa. Its population is rising quickly. Its economy is expanding, and leaders speak often about building a stronger future. The African Union is also based in Addis Ababa, making the city a center for political decisions that affect the entire continent. But even in this modern world, the old tensions remain. Ethnic divisions, political struggles, and regional conflicts still challenge the country. Different groups continue to compete for power and identity. At the same time, Ethiopia's culture continues to influence the world through music, food, language, and deep traditions that have survived for thousands of years. Walk through the countryside, and you will still see ancient churches carved into stone. Walk through the cities, and you will see modern life growing over old foundations. In one place, monks still pray in centuries-old rituals. In another, young people use smartphones and dream of global futures. Ethiopia is both ancient and modern at the same time. And as you look across its land, the same powerful images return again and again. Mountains that once protected early tribes. Churches that survived war and time. Battlefields where empires rose and fell. Cities that were destroyed and rebuilt. And people who have endured every chapter of this long history. For thousands of years, Ethiopia has survived invasions, collapse, isolation, famine, revolution, and war. Kingdoms rose. Dynasties fell. Empires burned. But somehow, Ethiopia endured. And that may be the most extraordinary part of its history.